So this is a landmark episode. This is episode 500 of the Neil Wilkins Podcast. I can't even believe I'm saying that. This is something that I never really thought I would ever get to this point. 500 episodes. That's a lot of conversations, a lot of listening, a lot of talking. And some people might think I like the sound of my own voice. And the person who is going to interview me and turn the tables on the recording in this particular episode is my wonderful wife, Sonya, who knows I like the sound of my own voice. Sonya, the microphone is yours.
Okay. Yes, well, I think it would be fair to say you found your voice, wouldn't it, during how long has it been since your first
Well,
ever?
the very first one was kind of pre-pandemic, wasn't it? Because if you remember, I did the 50 episodes in 50 days challenge. We all had a little challenge, didn't we, back in the lockdown? And so just prior to that, I think I recorded probably 10, maybe a dozen episodes, something like that. So it's probably 2019 was when it all kind of kicked off, really. But 2020 was the foundation of it proper, I guess.
And was that the intention behind setting those during lockdown, or was that just something for you to be doing? Was
Well,
it,
I don't know. I mean, it was a funny thing, wasn't it? Because it was a funny time, and we were all doing like loads of different kinds of things. And there was, I think, wasn't it the ice bucket challenge and all that kind of really weird and wacky stuff around that sort of time? It just kind of, everybody was setting different targets and different goals. And, I think we just kind of felt that over that summer, we were all just trying new stuff. And I think I was just curious as to whether I had the staying power to do an episode a day with whatever that entailed. And I never really understood what that entailed for a prolonged period of time. So I don't know if I ever kind of set out to do so many or so intensely, but it kind of just got into a bit of a nice habit, really.
So when you look back at those compared to your latest one that you would have recorded last week, what difference do you see and feel and hear? Kind of how paint a picture of the difference between you doing them and how you are now.
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, for me, I think it was scripted. Back then, I had a few ideas of what I was going to say. I had done research. I was kind of, I guess a little bit fish out of water. I kind of have always been, I think, reasonably good listeners. So I kind of trusted that bit, but I was still working to a loose script. Whereas now, absolutely the opposite. It is very much, we've got a title for the episode and I have no clue how I'm going to introduce the guest. Some of my regular listeners will probably think, yeah, we spot that. But it kind of, I just sort of go with the flow and I have no questions, no preconceived questions at all. And I'm just kind of hooking into the latest answer that the guest gives each and every time I ask a question. So that to me then makes it more of a conversation rather than a Q&A, which is where it started. So for me, that's the big difference. So different in approach, really.
Have you noticed anything on a personal level for you? I always like to get to the nitty-gritty of things. So rather than let you off the hook, I'd like to know in terms of self-awareness self-awareness, your awareness of self and how you exist and navigate the world. Emotionally, mentally, but also spiritually. How do you feel doing the podcast has evolved you?
I think it's multifaceted. I mean, I think one of the big things, and I know we've talked about this kind of recently, because you asked me a similar, maybe not quite such a deep question, maybe a couple of weeks ago. It's kind of like, how are you feeling about doing all of these? Because you seem to be recording like loads. And I think one of the things I felt was that it was just this connection with people literally on the other side of the planet. So I've recently recorded, literally on the same day with somebody who's based in Australia, literally back to back with somebody else who was based in Toronto. Both amazing guests and really interesting conversations, but just in my head, I'm just feeling, oh my God, I can actually touch these people who are literally the other side of the planet, different time zones, different lifestyles in many ways. So I think for me, it's just this And again, being an introvert, which, most people listening to the podcast would say, no, there's no way you are, but I so am, is the fact that I can be in my little studio, but still have connection. And this for me is my kind of go-to social kind of network now, really. It's just, I think for me, it's that growth of the ability to listen, but listening to really quite diverse guests, really. I think it's just been enlightening in many ways. And I've learned so much. I think, each guest brings something a little bit different that makes me think, I hadn't thought of it like that. Or they'll challenge something in an answer they give me, and I think, I'm not sure if I agree with that. But then I have to be, I guess, impartial. I can't be too controversial because, well, it would make them feel uncomfortable. It's not that style of show, really. So I think, just kind of pacing it and listening and being, I think, very self-assured, I think is a key for it for me. Because if I go into it without that feeling of it's my show, I'm owning it, but the guest is way more important than me, I think it's a nice balance to kind of feel that way. It's quite humble, really, I think, in lots of ways.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I've always said to you, rightly or wrongly, I've said it's interesting how you're so introverted and yet you love doing the podcasts. Because it certainly appears that way when you talk about them. And how you may want to elaborate, but how you've always said to me you could easily stand up and talk in front of a room of 100, 200, probably more people, and yet you are introverted. So it's quite an interesting dichotomy. Why do you think doing this through technology in the way that you do it, what is it really ticking in the box for you? What do you think is at the root of you that it's satisfying, if you like? And I'm probably digging here because I'm assuming some of your listeners would probably like to get to know you a little bit more than the polished Neil Wilkins brand. So at a
You're
deeper
wicked.
level.
You are. You knew you were going to do this.
Well, you knew I'd push you.
I knew you'd do this.
So what is it, if you think about your personality, your temperament? I mean, in a way, is it in your life purpose to do this? And if so, why?
It's an interesting one. I have thought about this quite a bit because it shouldn't be something that I really enjoy. It shouldn't be something that I'm particularly good at because, just being on my own, doing my own thing, obviously with you as well, is different. But, just like with the world and versus the world, it should be kind of, just me in a little bubble, and that should be my go-to. And so in some ways, this gives me, I guess, a flexibility. It gives me a route into connection with others that's kind of safe, but it kind of isn't. Some people might say, well, it's totally safe because you're behind a screen, you've got a microphone, you're not actually with the person. But for me, as an introvert, I'm totally there. I'm actually there. It's as close to being physically, literally eyeballing somebody in real life as it is actually having the conversation now. For me, I think, for extroverts, it's very different. And I think they need that handshake. They need to physically feel the presence. But as an introvert, this is as close a connection as I ever want, I think I could say. And certainly as I ever need. It really is. I could carry on doing this for the rest of my life and it would be totally satisfying in terms of human connection because it feels like it is. And it really genuinely feels like it is. And that's a little bit odd. And I think that whole thing about being on stage and being a really quiet person, because I am, even though I hear myself talking a huge amount when I do day workshops and courses and this, that, and the other, it's kind of like natter, here he goes, he's on and on and on again. But it's almost like I use this word sort of cautiously because it has connotations, but it's almost like I'm channeling something, a different me, a different part of me. And I kind of just let it go. And I think maybe going back to those early episodes way back, and I don't listen back to ones that long ago. I listened back to some of the more recent ones, but I don't think I'd kind of feel like I was channeling. It was much more Q&A. Whereas I think now I just kind of set myself free in the conversation. And I often find myself checking in as like, oh, Neil's still here listening. what's Neil doing? And what's he actually saying? And I hear myself when I do listen back to a recording, and it's like, that is a different person. I kind of know what I'm going to say next. I know, but it isn't a memory of what I've actually asked. It's like just I guess, a familiarity with the question or the way I respond, but I don't actually know what I'm going to say. So it feels like it's almost like a split personality in some ways. It's this kind of public face of Neil versus the quiet, retiring, very, very private Neil. There's almost like there's two versions of me. It's odd.
Interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Because I know we've talked and I explained to you how this is probably one of the most uncomfortable things for me to do. Whereas I'm very comfortable on the phone speaking to people, and I prefer one-to-one, but I'm not any good in big groups or presenting like you are. It's really interesting how as people we're all so different, aren't we, in what our capacities, but I suppose the window through which we choose to communicate, the way we choose to communicate, because you're not comfortable on the phone, are you?
Hate it. Really don't like it. I don't get that feedback. I don't get that, being able to look at you and just see the little kind of changes to your expression or the body language, or maybe you look away, just a glance away gives me that feedback. Whereas on the phone, hopeless. I'm absolutely lost. I mean, literally fish out of water, to use the phrase. Can't deal with it. Really don't like it. So I need that kind of that visual cue to be able to then kind of gauge how to navigate it, really. And it's really uncomfortable, genuinely uncomfortable.
So taking all of what you've said into consideration and remembering that this is your perspective coming from your world and your temperament, what would you say and advise to somebody listening who may be thinking of setting up their own podcast, and they might not have the natural innate ability or they might not be drawn to it in the way that you are? So what things would you advise and recommend?
I think certainly there's, again, great question. We haven't rehearsed this, everybody. I have no idea what Sonya's going to ask me. So, this is really kind of literally shooting from the hip. I think for me, one of the key things is to go where your passions are. So, my key topics right now are the metaverse, AI, sustainability, climate change. It's these really pertinent topics that I know kind of resonate with my audience. Everybody's tussling with this stuff. There's no playbook for it. So I'm kind of on a learning journey with it, but it's also topics that I kind of really feel deeply about. So I think, the first piece of advice would be don't force something that doesn't really resonate with you personally, which, of course, if you're representing a company or a brand, can often be quite tricky, because it's almost like you're forced into do it. You've got to have these conversations. You've got to do these interviews. You've got to set up this guest. And it might not be something that you're really feeling from your heart. So that, I understand, can be really a bit tricky. So maybe practice, maybe, set up your own little private one. It doesn't have to be, or personal one. It doesn't have to be something that you're going to try and take viral, for example. It doesn't have to be something you think, oh, 1 million people are going to hear this episode and this, that, and the other. Just do it amongst you and your friends or your family or your partner. Just have those conversations. Much like we're doing here, just reflecting and just having those conversations to almost sort of warm up your own style, because you might be surprised when you actually hear yourself back, and you do have to listen to yourself back. You've got to look in the mirror here, because you will not learn if you don't, because saying it and being on the session is very different to then taking a step back and actually then watching and listening to yourself. It's a whole different voice. You don't even necessarily even recognize yourself. So you have to do that. But I think starting with something that is, familiar or comfortable, and then maybe sort of stepping outside a little bit of that comfort zone, and maybe challenging with a topic that you don't know about, and maybe testing yourself a little bit, or maybe going for a guest who you don't know at all, or maybe a guest that you do know, but you don't necessarily resonate with personally. I've had 1 or 2 of those actually on the program, and those are the ones I've learned probably the most from, in terms about me and how I'm reacting to their answers. because you still have to be professional. You still have to kind of give them the value, but you're just thinking, I'm not really getting this with you. And it's only one or two, but they are there. So I think, it is about playing, but knowing that, and I think a lot of people who've done a lot of episodes would say this, and I've heard them say it. And people like Gary Vee, for example, is a great example of almost sort of looks back on his early episodes and has said, I just don't even recognize myself, but it doesn't matter. I got started. And that's the key, is just making a go of it and just beginning, because nobody's perfect. You will evolve. Episode 10 versus episode 100 versus episode 1,000 probably are going to be markedly different to the first one or two. And it doesn't matter. If you make a first step on that journey, you've begun. And nobody can knock you for that. They might not want to listen again, but that doesn't matter. You're doing this for you in many ways.
So what I'm hearing is follow your passion as topics to talk about, but also authenticity, in terms of how you're asking the questions. And I know you've said to me before that, there's lots of podcasts out there with, perfect kind of topping and tailing and music and all of these things. I mean, what's your opinion on that and the way that those podcasts are done?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to make this a radio show, I mean, literally, it's like your own, you are your own broadcaster. You are, because, if you've got an iPhone or you've got a setup like this, you become a podcaster. You can do it, and it's all free, which is amazing. It does not necessarily need to have high production values. And I think that was something I found out, particularly going through that sort of 50 episodes in 50 days, because I was trying to get it quite polished. And about halfway through realized, actually, when I look at the stats, it's not making a jot of difference. And I can be spending all this time doing post-production, trying to get that little, snippet out, or that little sound, or that little kind of, you hear a dog bark, and we'll have to get rid of that. And it makes no difference. And so now we do absolutely no post-production at all. We clip either end of it. Obviously, you don't want a big long silence between kind of episodes if somebody's listening to these back to back. But beyond that, for me anyway, it makes no difference. But I get it that some people might be looking to create a really high production value legacy here. They might be looking to create almost like a TV show. And again, if that floats your boat, then great, do it. But for me and my audience, they just want the conversation.
And often I think that does add to the authenticity, doesn't it? When there is some real life in there, some things, it's not too polished. I think that's quite important, and certainly seems to be for you. And so what would you say in terms of more practicalities? You've said that you've learned along the way that there are certain things that really don't affect the stats, and that maybe you were trying to make it too polished. But I'm guessing through all of the exciting things that I hear you buy and you tell me, and you've got this new thing that's, going to make the difference, and we get different lights and different speakers and different padding for the walls and all these different things that I've remembered you've gone through. But there must be some key things that you think are important on a practical level for somebody who's looking to set up. And obviously it depends, I guess, on the room, because everyone's room is going to be different. But what things would you say are the top 3 things that you really need to look out for on a practical level when you're setting up to start your own podcast?
I think it's again, brilliant question. I mean, it's always about audio and lighting. I mean, it sounds like really, really obvious, but you can begin literally using your iPhone. So you can record direct to something like podcasters.spotify.com, I think is the thing. But anyway, Spotify. You can, which used to be called Anchor until Anchor was bought out by Spotify. Many other services are available. That's the one that I've been using literally forever. It feels. And you can literally record straight from your iPhone, straight into the app, press publish, and then it's out to everything from Apple Podcasts to Spotify and beyond. So it can be as simple as that. So you don't even need to worry about any complicated equipment. But yes, Sonya, as you know, yes, I do have a penchant for buying the odd gadget now and again. Yes, the roll of the eyes from my wife there. Yes, one or two things that we've experimented with in terms of the gadgets and things. I struggle in this particular room because one of the things about this room is echo. This is not perfect, and I'm far from it. So, hence, obviously, trying all these little techniques and all this kind of guidance and all these little gadgets to try and muffle the sound, deaden the sound, make it neutral, get rid of those echoes and stuff. You have to experiment. It is as simple as that. You have to experiment. Every single room has got a very different resonance, different dynamic. No two rooms are the same. They're different dimensions. You've got different feedback. But do experiment with, the eggshell soundproofing all the way through to, literally creating a sound booth. I mean, it's all of the above. But for me, I think it's, beyond the sound, it is definitely the lighting, having a lighting kind of setup that you're happy with. But of course, if you're doing remote interviews, I mean, 99.9% of the interviews I do are remote. Even this one, we're in a different space as we record this. You're kind of reliant on your guest having a decent setup as well. So I tend to kind of be quite relaxed. I think as long as I look and sound okay, it's generally, not in all cases, but it's generally better than the guest anyway. So I don't want to get it sort of too polished on my side, because then it really emphasizes that a lot of the guests who are, brilliant guests, and I would not want to say no to them because of their kit, they generally have less good or less professional setup. So you kind of got to balance it with that. You don't want one that looks absolutely ultra high definition on one side and then something that looks like, you're really struggling with really old tech on the others. So it is difficult. But if you're doing a podcast kind of setup and you're looking to create almost like a studio that would be like a TV show where you're both in the same room, then you can go to town. You can really explore, what is available. But I would say if you're looking to do that, you're probably looking at maybe $200-300 worth of kit to make a really high production kind of quality. We're not talking thousands of dollars, whatever anybody says. There's a lot you can do on a relatively low budget, but the budget can be zero if you want it to be.
Oh, great. Okay. And out of, you've already mentioned Gary Vee. Are there any, I'm assuming Gary Vee is one of the people that has inspired you with your podcast, but have you got any favorite podcasts you like to listen to, or podcasters who have inspired you?
Yeah, I mean, they're quite diverse, actually. I mean, I'll pick one from the whole kind of sort of holistic spiritual kind of angle, and I'll pick one from the tech angle. I'll go with the spiritual kind of angle first, and that's Tammy Simon. And I know that Tammy and the work that she's doing there, a whole host of different guests. I would say a very, very low key, very, very chilled, very kind of high production value podcast host. Really sets an ambience that is all about you settle back with your favorite, mug of hot chocolate in a beautiful warm room, maybe the sun's setting, and you really kind of absorb yourself into it. It's all about the production values and going deep within yourself and reflecting. So I think Tammy Simon and Sounds True, I think is a very, very good example there on the one hand. Other end of the spectrum, something that is really interesting for me at the moment is a kind of half human, half AI podcast, which is the AI Breakdown, which is a very short, very kind of news-driven podcast, which you can get on all of the main platforms. It's called the AI Breakdown, which is a daily bulletin of AI news. Half of it is by the host, and the other half is his avatar literally giving you a bulletin of the AI news. I mean, I love the irony of that. It's an AI avatar reading AI news. It sounds just like him, but you can tell it's not him. And so at the other end of the spectrum, short, punchy, very, very up-tempo, very newsy, not about reflection. It's all about gathering news. And for me, those two kind of extremes are the breadth of what podcast offers. It can be, deep and really kind of spiritual and you go inward, or it can be very newsworthy. You're just grabbing it on the go as you grab your coffee, you're running for the office or a train, and it's everything in between. So there's just something for everyone in podcasting, I would suggest.
So how long is it going to be before we see your AI in your podcast? your
We
avatar?
may well be seeing, I can't announce anything officially yet, but the early part of next year, we are going to see the first, it may well be a Neil, but it might not be a Neil avatar, but there will be avatars joining me on the show. And we will be having conversations with some AIs who will be guests early in 2025. Watch this space.
Interesting. And so leading on from that, where do you see podcasting going in terms of the future technology, AI? Where do you see things growing and evolving?
I think a lot of us who have kind of played in this space for a while now certainly believe that audio is not going anywhere. I think a lot of us have been kind of, almost sort of wowed by the metaverse, wowed obviously by ChatGPT and all its friends and all the other AI kind of tools. And obviously we've got avatars coming in and all this kind of stuff. Audio in itself, if you just kind of isolate audio just for a moment, a lot of us are using audio both on our phones to do search. Most of us have got some kind of audio technology in the home. Probably the office is kind of less intruded there, but certainly at home, we're asking our AIs to play our latest, favorite song, or, sort of doing a search, through Siri or Alexa. We're just kind of talking to our rooms at home. And I think in many ways, I think we're going to see kind of short form audio, much as we see short form video like YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels, etc. I think we're going to start to see a lot more kind of short form audio clips as we begin to search more using audio. And of course, anybody who's got some really high quality, podcasts that the AIs and that the search engines can kind of clip from, I think we're going to see audio actually being very, very searchable in podcast. So if you've got a lot of legacy podcasts, and of course I'm talking to brand owners here and brand marketers, if you're creating legacy content here that can be searchable, you're going to be in the driving seat for that new space. So I think there's a lot of great commercial reasons why you'd want to do this, as well as personal reasons.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you. So I guess it would be nice to start to round up a little bit by asking you your top 3 podcasts that you've done. Now, I know you won't want to be unfair to anyone, so in some ways that's an awkward question. However, you've already explained that sometimes a podcast stands out because actually it's been more difficult for you, because you've not necessarily resonated with the subject or understood it, or maybe the person. So it doesn't have to be, your favorite in terms of the funniest, or, it's, I guess, the top 3 that you remember and why. So what is it that makes you remember those? What is it that makes them stand out, and why? What are the reasons? Out of 500. So I guess that's quite difficult.
That is, yeah. So if you're listening to this and you were a guest, my apologies for having the worst memory in the history of the universe. I'm probably going to go for, as you say, Sonya, ones that kind of, stand out in my memory. And this isn't to say these were the best. I mean, they were good. They were very good. But they weren't necessarily the only ones that I put on my list. So these are not necessarily the top 3, but they're 3 that really stood out. I think one for me, and in fact there were 2, because he's come back actually onto the program, and it was a real kind of journey, because we set out without any kind of real title in mind, and we really kind of just had a conversation, and that's Colin Kingsmill, who's been on to the show a couple of times, and I know you've listened to his shows. Lovely guy, great guy. We really resonate. And those were really conversational, because we both agreed in advance that we had so many things we could talk about. It had to be a conversation that didn't narrow us down, and we had no idea where we were going. So that was, probably 2 episodes there with Colin that were really, really good. And I'm hoping to get him back on the podcast early in the new year. Another guest, actually, again, who's been on twice, is Rob Moore. Now, Rob and I, by our own admittance, have probably the most opposing styles of delivery. Rob is very, very numbers, stats, guidance, quotes in your face. And he would love me to say that, because he really is. He's so punchy in his delivery. And I'm not. I'm much more gentle. I'm much softer than Rob. So I would say the 2 episodes with Rob have really kind of tested me, because I ask a question and he gives the answer that Rob wants to give, not necessarily directly answering my question, but every single soundbite that Rob Moore gives is absolute genius. And still to this day, in terms of the shorts that we've created, I think we've created more shorts from his episodes than any, probably actually all the rest put together. So it's that kind of quality. So probably Rob Moore would come into that top 3 as well. And I'm going to say a really, really odd one here, because it's one that I think is going to be in the top 3 that hasn't actually been recorded yet. And I don't want to kind of give too much away, but I've got an upcoming episode which is going to slightly buck the trend from the usual kind of ones that I do, and this one is going to get a little bit political. I'm not going to tell you who the guest is, but in the first week of December it's going to be recorded, and it'll go out instantly that it's recorded, and the reason being is because it's talking about the current political situation, should we say, and the current economic situation. I don't normally do politics and economics, but we're going to go there, and this guy has opinions and he's willing to share his opinions. It's going to be a bumpy ride, and I'm really looking forward to that. So it's a future one. It isn't one that we've actually recorded, but he has been on the podcast before many episodes ago.
Okay.
So I can't say more than that, but it's just a little carrot dangling for my regular listeners. Early December, watch out for that one.
So that sounds like it'll keep you on your toes.
It will, and it does, and to be fair, they all do, because I think as a podcast host, the single thing I've really learned is you cannot take your focus off of the very next question that you're going to ask, because the podcast doesn't work if you drift at any point. And I have to say, in those 500 episodes, I don't think I've drifted once, and it is because they just have this kind of by default, this pressure on the host to keep real and to keep on it at every single moment you're recording. And of course, if anybody has done, and I've done 1 or 2 of these, the live podcasts as well, where we're recording as well as actually going live, those take it to a whole new level. So I look forward to doing a few more of those too in the coming months.
Yeah, that sounds good. So the other thing I wanted to ask was a bit like when you watch a program or a film and you have the kind of takeouts. Now, again, possibly an awkward question, but have there been any moments where it's gone completely wrong, or you've just said you don't wander in your mind, so it sounds like you've not had a situation where you've completely lost track and then fumbled a bit, but can you think of any moments where it has gone a bit wrong?
I'd love to come back with some really funny anecdotes and be able to put these in as kind of like, I can't remember the word, but where you put all those clips in at the end and everybody's like laughing and chortling. To be honest, we haven't really had any like that. I suppose that a couple of occasions, kind of relatively early on, probably maybe 150 to 200 episodes in, twice in actually quite quick succession, I forgot to press the record button. And I was about 10 minutes into the conversation realizing, oh no, I haven't pressed record. And of course, the guest is absolutely in flow and they're on fire and they've done the quotes. And I say, I'm really, really sorry. I'm going to have to press record. Could we ask that again? And of course, then the second version is just nowhere near as good as the first. Okay. So I suppose that's really where it's gone wrong, but it hasn't necessarily been amusing or funny.
You've not had any kind of animals walk across the screen,
I'm
or
still
people
waiting for that. I'm still
inappropriately dressed or not dressed turn up in the background or anything like that.
I'm still waiting. I think maybe you have to do a few hundred more to be able to get to that point. But no, unfortunately, I'm still waiting for that moment.
So with 2025 not far away, how many weeks is it? I don't know, 7?
About 6 or 7 weeks now.
7 weeks. What do you hope for next year in terms of your podcast, but also the Neil Wilkins brand? What are you hoping to achieve, to share, to attain? Yeah. What are your goals and aspirations for next year?
They're still evolving, and we haven't really even talked about this. So this is me kind of releasing this live before you and I have even talked about it. And we share everything. We kind of know pretty much everything that's going on. So this is, I guess, very, very kind of early. It's almost the embryos of these things. But what I'd be really excited to do, and I've already mentioned the Avatar podcast, where actually I'm interviewing live an avatar who's answering and talking to me. That'll be relatively early in the new year. We're also going to be focusing in on a lot more of the live. I mentioned about doing kind of live broadcasts with podcasts. It's not for every guest. Some guests are like, oh, no, that's way too beyond. But obviously I've done a lot of live stuff. So, I'm very keen to try and experiment with that, but also doing stuff in the metaverse. So really bringing the tech in and maybe having a live audience, I think could be also a very interesting thing. I'm looking to do these, and I'm calling them not virtual reality sessions, but blended reality, where, there's some people obviously real world, there's some people who are avatars or sending their avatars in as their representative to kind of take notes, as it were, but also having this kind of hybrid sense of we've got a real live audience who can actually ask questions as well as just me being the host. So for me, the brand is kind of moving into this hybrid way. I don't think necessarily it's here to replace me, but if the Neil Wilkins avatar actually starts to perform better in the podcast than I do, I'm willing to stand aside for a while and just see how that goes. But maybe that's for 2026. I don't know. But yeah, this blended hybrid reality, I think for me, is kind of where the whole brand and all my work sort of seems to be drawing me. And it's exciting, it's fun, and there's a bit of a wow factor in there too.
Sounds exciting. Yeah, sounds really interesting. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that we've not covered about your podcast or where you're going and what you're doing?
Just to say thank you to you, just in public and on the podcast, because 500 episodes in is, it's nearly 1,000 hours worth of time that I could have spent with you. So I really, say thank you, from the bottom of my heart for all your support, because, you do, and you have given me a lot of ideas and stuff to share. And there's a few little phrases I say, and I always try and remember to give you a little bit of a shout out when I do it. It's like, no, this is from Sonya. This isn't my original idea. I'm getting better at that. It's not my skill set really, but I try and do that whenever I remember it. So 500 hours out of our collective life here. And I think, thank you for supporting it and continuing to support it. And who would have thought back in pandemic that you and I would be on this this call, you asking me questions 500 episodes in. So thank you for always being there.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, and surprising that I'm actually here on the basis that I really don't like doing screen stuff, but I'm gradually getting a bit more familiar with it. And I can see, like what you say, there's the benefit in connecting with so many people across the world, so it's a really good way of doing that. And it's just been nice to see when somebody finds an avenue, a path for themselves that lights them up, because I can see that it does that for you. And it certainly gives you your injection of networking and socializing through a screen and expanding your knowledge and awareness. So it certainly seems to be part of your ikigai, want for a different expression, your purpose. So it's good to be part of that.
Wonderful. Thank you. So here's to episode 501, everybody. And thank you for listening, and thank you for bearing with us as we have this little retrospective over the first 500. Who knows where this podcast is going to take us? And that's the beauty of podcasting. You have no idea where this is going to go or who you're going to talk to. So thank you, Sonya, for asking the questions today. And here's on to episode 501.